November 9th, 1927, 6:30 a.m. Commonwealth Hotel, Chicago. The maid's scream echoes down the hallway of the 10th floor. Room 1025. The door that wouldn't open. The pool of blood that had been spreading for 8 hours. Inside, a man lies crumpled on the carpet, his throat slashed from ear to ear, his face carved into strips of hanging flesh. Part of his tongue sits severed on the blood-soaked floor. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. 18 hours earlier, this man had been the hottest entertainer in Chicago. His voice could fill a nightclub and make hardened gangsters weep. He was making more money in a week than most men made in a year. His name was Joey Lewis, and he had just learned the most expensive lesson of his life. You don't break contracts with Al Capone's organization. This is the story of how a $350 per week raise nearly cost a man his life. How two enforcers spent 4 minutes destroying everything that made him valuable, and how the entertainment industry in Prohibition-era America was controlled by men who settled business disputes with knives and guns. But it's also the story of something more remarkable, how Joey Lewis survived the worst punishment the Chicago outfit could inflict, transformed his damaged voice into his greatest asset, and proved that sometimes the most brutal attempts to silence someone only make them more powerful. Chicago, 1923. The city of Al Capone, speakeasies, and opportunities for anyone willing to work outside the law. 21-year-old Joseph Clewan stepped off a train from New York, carrying a cardboard suitcase and a voice that would make him famous. He'd already changed his name to Joey Lewis, the E added to distinguish himself from a boxer, and he had one clear goal: make enough money performing in Chicago's illegal nightclubs to never worry about money again. Prohibition had turned the simple act of serving a drink into federal crime, but it had also created the largest black market in American history. Chicago had over 10,000 illegal drinking establishments, speakeasies, nightclubs, private clubs, all generating tens of millions of dollars annually, and every one of them needed entertainment. Lewis understood the economics immediately. Legal theaters paid their performers a pittance, maybe $50 a week, for 6 nights. Illegal nightclubs paid whatever it took to keep customers coming back. The money was extraordinary, but it came with strings attached. The men who owned these clubs weren't entertainment executives. They were bootleggers, racketeers, and killers who discovered that nightclubs provided perfect fronts for their illegal operations. For 4 years, Lewis worked his way up through Chicago's nightclub hierarchy. He performed in basement speakeasies, where the audience carried guns. He learned to sing while gunshots rang out in the street. He developed nerves of steel and a voice that could cut through any crowd. By 1927, he had achieved something remarkable. He was the main attraction at the Green Mill Gardens, the most prestigious nightclub in Chicago, making $650 per week, over $10,000 in today's money. But Joey Lewis had also achieved something dangerous. He had forgotten who really controlled the venue where he worked. The Green Mill Gardens wasn't just another nightclub. It was a piece of Al Capone's empire, managed by one of the most dangerous men in Chicago. Jack Machine Gun McGurn was 25 years old in 1927, but he'd already killed more men than most soldiers saw in combat. Born Vincenzo Garibaldi, he'd adopted an Irish name to blend in better with Chicago's criminal landscape. McGurn had earned his nickname through his weapon of choice, the Thompson submachine gun. He was credited with at least 25 murders, though federal investigators suspected the real number was much higher. He was Al Capone's most trusted lieutenant, the man Capone relied on when precision and ruthlessness were required. But McGurn had another role. He managed the Green Mill Gardens, overseeing both its legitimate entertainment business and its illegal operations. The nightclub generated enormous profits through overpriced illegal liquor, high-stakes gambling, and serving as a meeting place for criminal planning. The Green Mill wasn't just profitable, it was prestigious. Charlie Chaplin performed there. Eddie Cantor brought Broadway audiences. Texas Guinan, the most famous nightclub hostess in America, considered it her second home. At the center of it all was Joey Lewis, whose voice brought in customers and created an atmosphere of sophistication that made criminal activity seem legitimate. McGurn trusted Lewis. The entertainer never asked questions about the men who came and went through McGurn's private office. He never mentioned the bulges under their jackets or the blood on their shoes. He understood that his job was to entertain, not to notice. That trust was about to be shattered by an offer Lewis couldn't refuse. October 1927, the Rendezvous Cafe, North Side Chicago. Danny Cohen wasn't the kind of man who usually approached entertainers directly. As a lieutenant in the North Side Gang, Cohen dealt in bootleg liquor, illegal gambling, and occasional murder. But he had a problem that required an entertainer's solution. The Rendezvous Cafe couldn't compete with the Green Mill Gardens. Customers wanted to see Joey Lewis, and Lewis was under contract to McGurn. Cohen's solution was simple: steal Lewis away. "We'll pay you $1,000 a week," Cohen said without preamble. "Plus 10% of the covered charges." Lewis nearly choked on his coffee. $1,000 per week was more than most doctors made. The total offer was nearly triple his current salary. It should have been an easy decision. Lewis was a performer, not a gangster. When his contract expired, he would be free to work wherever he chose. But Lewis understood the unwritten rules of Chicago's entertainment business. The city's nightclubs weren't competing on equal terms. Each one was controlled by different criminal organizations, and those organizations didn't appreciate having their assets stolen. Still, the money was too good to refuse. "I'll think about it," Lewis said. October 25th, 1927. Lewis walked into McGurn's office at the Green Mill and made the decision that would nearly kill him. "I won't be renewing my contract," he said. McGurn listened without expression. When Lewis finished, there was a long silence. "You're making a mistake," McGurn finally said. "My contract expires," Lewis replied. "I'm free to work wherever I want." "You're free to do whatever you want," McGurn agreed. "But actions have consequences." No threats were made explicitly. No violence was discussed directly, but Lewis left understanding he had just declared war on one of the most dangerous men in Chicago. He called Danny Cohen that afternoon and accepted the offer. Lewis opened at the Rendezvous Cafe on November 1st, 1927. For 6 days, everything went perfectly. The club was packed every night. Customers came from across the city to see the entertainer who'd left the prestigious Green Mill for a North Side rival. Lewis was making more money than he'd ever imagined possible. He was the talk of Chicago's entertainment scene. For 6 days, it seemed like talent could triumph over territory, that an entertainer's relationship with his audience mattered more than his relationship with the men who owned the venue. But on November 7th, Lewis noticed the black Buick following him home. The warning came the next day. Sam Giancana and Leonard Needles Gianola intercepted him outside his hotel. "Jack wants to see you," Giancana said. "I'm not under contract to Jack anymore," Lewis replied. "Jack still wants to see you." This wasn't a request. They arranged to meet after his show the following night. November 8th, Lewis gave what would be his final performance as the singer Chicago knew and loved. At 11:30 p.m., he finished his last number and walked outside to meet the men who would change his life forever. November 9th, 1927, 12:02 a.m. Commonwealth Hotel, room 1025. The room was dark when Lewis unlocked his door and stepped inside. Sam Giancana, Leonard Needles Gianola, and a third man whose name Lewis never learned were waiting for him. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. "Where's McGurn?" Lewis asked. "Jack's not coming," Gianola said. "He sent us to deliver a message." What happened next was methodical, brutal, and designed to send a message to anyone else who might consider betraying the Chicago outfit. They didn't kill Joe E. Lewis. Death would have been merciful. Instead, they destroyed the thing that made him valuable. Gianola grabbed Lewis from behind. The third man held his legs. Giancana produced a 10-inch hunting knife. "You want to sing for someone else?" Giancana asked. "Let's see how well you sing without a voice." The attack was surgical in its precision. First, Giancana slashed Lewis's throat from ear to ear, cutting through the vocal cords but missing the carotid artery by less than an inch. Blood poured from the wound. Next, they forced his mouth open and pulled out his tongue. Giancana cut away part of it, leaving just enough so Lewis could swallow, but ensuring he'd never speak clearly again. The beating came last. They used brass knuckles and pistol butts to fracture his skull in 9 places. They shattered his cheekbone. They broke his right arm. "Tell anyone who asks," Giancana said to the dying man at his feet. "This is what happens when you break faith with the outfit." The attack lasted exactly 4 minutes. 6:30 a.m. Mrs. Margaret Keene knocked on room 1025 for the 3rd time. When no one answered, she used her master key. Joe E. Lewis lay unconscious in a pool of blood. His face was unrecognizable. His throat gaped open. Part of his tongue lay severed on the carpet, but he was still breathing. Dr. Richard Patterson at Henroten Hospital later described Lewis's injuries as the worst he'd seen in 20 years of emergency medicine. The vocal cords were severed. Part of the tongue was removed. The skull was fractured in 9 places. Blood loss was severe. Patterson estimated Lewis had lost over half his blood volume. Another hour without medical attention would have been fatal. The police investigation proceeded along predictable lines. They collected evidence, interviewed witnesses, identified the attackers, but no one would testify. The case stalled within days. Everyone in Chicago knew who was responsible. Machine Gun Jack McGurn had sent his message loud and clear. But McGurn didn't anticipate his boss's reaction. Al Capone was furious not at Lewis, but at McGurn for creating unwanted attention to the organization's entertainment operations. Within weeks, Capone made a surprising decision. He would personally fund Joe E. Lewis's recovery. Joe E. Lewis spent 4 months in the hospital. The first month, doctors weren't sure he would survive. The second month, they weren't sure he would ever speak again. But Lewis was tougher than anyone realized. He couldn't speak for 2 months. When he finally wrote his first note to doctors, it read, "When can I perform again?" "Doctor," Patterson tried to explain that performing was no longer realistic. Lewis's vocal cords were permanently damaged. His career as a singer was over. Lewis wrote another note, "Then I'll become a comedian." The speech therapy began in January 1928. Lewis relearned how to form words with a partially severed tongue and damaged vocal cords. The process was excruciating, but he worked 8 hours daily. In February 1928, Al Capone visited the hospital carrying $10,000 in cash, over $150,000 today. "This is to help with your recovery," Capone said. "You're a good entertainer. Chicago needs good entertainers." Capone never apologized for McGurn's actions, but the money was both acknowledgement and investment. By funding Lewis's recovery, Capone ensured the story ended with redemption rather than tragedy. October 1928. 11 months after the attack, Joe E. Lewis walked onto a Chicago stage for the first time. He looked different. The scars were visible across his face and neck. His right arm hung stiffly, paralyzed from the beating. But when he spoke into the microphone, something unexpected happened. The damaged vocal cords gave his voice a raspy, intimate quality that was somehow more compelling than his original singing voice. "Good evening," Lewis said. "I've been away for a while. Had a little throat surgery." The crowd laughed nervously. "The doctor said my singing voice is gone forever," Lewis continued. "So tonight, I'm going to try talking instead." What followed was the birth of a new kind of entertainment. Lewis couldn't sing the way he used to, so he developed a style combining comedy with storytelling. Delivered in his new, damaged voice, he talked about his hospital experience. He joked about relearning how to speak. He even made fun of his scars, calling them Chicago's version of plastic surgery. The audience was mesmerized. This wasn't just entertainment, it was testimony. Lewis was proving you could survive the worst that Chicago's underworld could inflict and come back stronger. Within months, Lewis was making more money than he'd ever earned at the Green Mill. His new persona as the comedian who cheated death became his trademark. For 40 years after the attack, Lewis performed across America, always opening with reference to his Chicago experience. "I used to be a singer," he would tell audiences. "Then I had a disagreement with my boss about my contract. He thought it should be renewed. I thought it should be terminated. We compromised. He terminated my vocal cords." Machine Gun Jack McGurn never faced charges for ordering the attack. He continued operating until the 15th of February, 1936, when two gunmen shot him 14 times at a bowling alley. They left a Valentine's card on his body. "You've lost your job. You've lost your dough. But things could be worse, you know. You haven't lost your trousers." Sam Giancana eventually became boss of the Chicago outfit before being murdered in his kitchen in 1975. Leonard Needles, Giannola, was shot to death in 1951. The justice system never held them accountable for what they did to Joe E. Lewis. But the streets eventually did. Joe E. Lewis performed until his death in 1971, becoming one of America's highest-paid entertainers. Frank Sinatra portrayed him in the 1957 film The Joker Is Wild. His story inspired books, movies, and magazine articles. But Lewis's greatest victory wasn't professional success. It was proving that the Chicago outfit's most brutal message could be survived and transformed into something positive. Every time Lewis walked onto a stage with his scarred face and damaged voice, he demonstrated that intimidation had limits, that creativity could triumph over violence, that the human spirit could rebuild itself after being systematically destroyed. The men who cut his tongue meant to silence him forever. Instead, they gave him a story that made him famous and a voice more powerful than the one they tried to destroy. Today, there's no marker at the Commonwealth Hotel indicating what happened in room 1025, but in Chicago's entertainment district, Joe E. Lewis's story endures as a reminder of an era when show business and organized crime were inseparable, and survival itself became the greatest performance of all. You can cut out a man's tongue, but you can't silence his spirit.